Welcome, students, to our review of Chapter 1 of The Great Gatsby. Now, in our last video, I went in depth into who Nick is, East Egg, West Egg, and all that other stuff. So if you need to go back and watch that one, rewatch that one. I'm not going to review that here. But essentially, at the very beginning of the book, Nick introduces himself, and he moved out to New York City to learn the bond business after going to college. Now, he happens to rent this cardboard little bungalow in Long Island Sound right next door to this huge mansion that Gatsby owns next door. Now, the book begins when Nick drives on over from West Egg over to East Egg, Old Money, to visit his cousin Daisy Buchanan. Now, let's go ahead and review these characters. Who are? So there's Nick. We've learned a lot about him already. So he drives on over to East Egg. Now, if you thought that West Egg was bougie, holy cow, East Egg is, whoo, it's nice. It's nice. So we go to the Buchanan's house, and their house is absolutely massive. They've got acres and acres and acres of manicure yards that Tom plays polo on. It's beautiful. I mean, just the description of their house is absolutely gorgeous. So there are four characters we need to pay attention to in this chapter. Number one, there is Nick. Number two, Daisy Buchanan, Nick's cousin. Three, Tom. Tom and Daisy are married, but they have a terrible marriage. And then there's Jordan Baker, Miss Jordan Baker. All the other characters, we don't need to pay attention to the butlers. They're hardly human. We don't pay attention to them. And then we have, there's one more. Gatsby. We got to talk a little bit about Gatsby. He's mentioned, but he's not really a part of this chapter. Okay, the first guy that we meet over in East Egg is Tom freaking Buchanan. I hate this guy, but he's a fun guy to hate. So the first thing that Nick says, you remember how Nick's like, hey, in my younger, more vulnerable years, my dad told me some advice. Don't judge people. And then the first thing Nick says is completely judgmental to Tom. He says this, Tom in college was one of the most powerful ends that ever played at New Haven at Yale University. And he was he was a national figure who reached an acute limited excellence at 21 that everything else savored of anticlimax. This guy peaked in college, and he's got nothing left to look forward to. He would drift forever seeking, a little wistfully, the dramatic turbulence of some irrecoverable football game. He's like a rich Uncle Rico. He's always dreaming about the glory days of football. Now, he's picked up polo since, and that's a very expensive sport to get into, but Tom's got plenty of money to do that. He doesn't work for a living. He just exists and plays polo. We also learn that he's a terrible dude. This is how he introduces himself. Hey, Nick, I haven't seen you in a while. Now, don't think my opinion on these matters is final just because I'm stronger and more of a man than you are. Oh my gosh, I can't stand the guy. Now, if that didn't bother you enough, we figure out later that he's reading this terrible racist book. I believe that's on page 17. Let's go over to this one. Yeah, he's reading this book. Civilization's going to pieces, Tom says. Have you read The Rise of the Colored Empire by this guy named Godard? Oh my goodness. He's reading a book about eugenics. The idea that Hitler used to justify the mass extermination of millions of people. And Tom's over here reading this book and we're like, yes, it's all scientific stuff. It's all been proven. Oh my gosh, this guy is terrible. Then Daisy's like, yeah, Tom's reading these big books with these really long, what was that word? Eugenics. It's terrifying. So, one more strike against Tom. But if that wasn't enough, we find out that Tom is having an affair with his wife. And everybody knows about it. During dinner, there's a phone call. And the butler comes over and whispers in Tom's ear, hey, the phone's for you. Tom's like, ugh. He stands up and then he leaves. And then Daisy is clearly uncomfortable with it. And hold on. Well, let's talk about Daisy right now a little bit. Like Daisy is like this, let's go here. She's beautiful. She's got blonde hair. Later, Nick describes her as the golden girl. He's kind of obsessed with her voice. And I'm like, Nick, you do realize she's your cousin, right? Anyway, but she's kind of a flirt, and she's a flirt with everybody. Now, unlike Tom, who flirts with everybody and takes it way too far, she's just kind of playful with everybody. So Daisy is the blonde one pictured right here, and Nick is catching up with her, and they're talking, and Tom and Daisy are married, but it's not a great marriage. And she seems like the person who is always just pretending that life is good and that she's happy and everything's wonderful, even though her life is falling apart around her. Now, she's got enough money in her life that even though her life is falling apart, she's still doing okay. But nonetheless, she is deeply, deeply hurt and sad. Now, she's aware of Tom's affairs, and she's pretending like they're not even a part of it. So during dinner, the butler comes. Tom, there's someone on the phone with you. Tom stands up. He goes in the other room to answer the phone. And this is really interesting. Daisy tries to pretend like this isn't going on. She knows exactly what's going on. So while her husband's talking to the mistress in the other room, she's like, oh, I love to see you at my table, Nick. You're like a rose. Aren't you a rose? Jordan, doesn't he look like a rose? And Nick's like, no, that's untrue. I'm not a rose. He's more like a tulip. But then she's like, ugh, and then she throws down her napkin on the table, excuses herself, and went into the house. She's going to confront Tom about the affair. And what's interesting is after they come back, they both come back from this. And you can imagine this is like a heated confrontation. Like, Tom, I can't stand that you're always having these affairs. Why is that woman calling this house right now? Oh, stop. Like, she's upset about this. But she comes back, both she and Tom, and they pretend like nothing is going on. She's like, oh, isn't it romantic, Tom? Look at that cute little bird. It's romantic. Oh my goodness, they're just pretending like this isn't happening. Everybody's aware of this affair. Jordan's like, didn't you know, Nick? And he's like, no, I didn't know. Everybody knows about this affair. So now let's quickly talk about Jordan. Jordan and Daisy grew up, they're best friends, and they've been lifelong friends. Jordan, it turns out that she's an athlete. We find that out later in chapter 1. And she's going to go play in a tournament. That tournament, it's a golf tournament. She is a famous golfer. And Nick recognizes her from magazines. It's like, oh, yeah, you're Jordan Baker. You're that golfer. I've seen you on magazines before. And Jordan, when she comes in, like, Jordan is a little bit stuck up. When Nick first comes to the house, Jordan doesn't even acknowledge Nick. There was that one part in there. Let me go find. I think it's on page 7. So when Nick walks into the house at the very beginning of the chapter, she's sitting full length at the end of her divan, not a couch like common peasants. She's completely motionless with her chin rested up a little bit. Kind of like this photograph right here. And she was balancing something like it's about to fall. And she doesn't even acknowledge Nick's presence. There are only 4 people at the house. There's Tom, there's Daisy, there's Nick, the invited guest, and Jordan doesn't even acknowledge him. And then Nick says, I was almost surprised into murmuring an apology for having disturbed her by coming in. Nick is so intimidated by how pretentious Jordan is and how stuck up that he is. He's like, oh, I'm sorry that I exist. I will stop existing because that's making you uncomfortable. So that's a little bit about Jordan. Now, the one time that finally when Jordan does acknowledge Nick, he says, hey, I'm over in West Egg. And she's like, West Egg? You must know Gatsby. And to which Daisy replies, Gatsby? What Gatsby? Now, that sounds like a plot point right there in a book called The Great Gatsby. And someone says, Gatsby, you must know. We got to pay attention to that. But then it's suddenly and mysteriously dropped. Okay, so that's pretty much the night at the beginning. Oh, there's one more thing. When Jordan goes to bed, she goes upstairs. She's like just living perpetually in the Buchanan's one of the many extra spare bedrooms that she has. When Jordan goes off to bed because she's got a tournament in the morning, Daisy looks at Nick and is like, hey, I'm going to fling you two together. You know, put you in a linen closet or put you in a boat or push you out to sea. I'm going to hook you two up and play matchmaker here, which is really interesting because at the end of the night, Daisy's like, hey, aren't you engaged? Isn't it funny? It's not funny. It's actually tragic how they just like the institution of marriage for these people is just, it's nothing, right? Despite the believing that Nick is engaged back home, he isn't, but they believe that Nick is engaged. She's still willing to hook Nick up with one of her friends. Like, everybody is having an affair in this book. It's crazy. All right, at the end of the chapter, Nick gets in his car. He's had a long evening with the Buchanan's house. He gets back into his car. He drives from East Egg all the way over to West Egg, and he parks his car. And this part is important. When he gets out of the car and he sees a mysterious figure 50 feet away from him, he realizes that it's Gatsby. Now, Gatsby was standing with his hands in his pockets regarding the silver pepper of the stars. Something in his leisurely movements and the secure position of his feet upon the lawn suggested it was Mr. Gatsby himself. I love this next line. Come out to determine what share of his was of our local heavens. So Gatsby is like sitting, he's standing confidently, staring out across the bay and into the heavens. He's looking at the Milky Way galaxy, and he's like, got this huge mansion behind me. I'm rich. I'm powerful. I own the south quadrant of the Milky Way galaxy. I don't even know if there's a south quadrant of the Milky Way galaxy, but Gatsby owns it, all right? That's how much money the dude has. And Nick's like, I'm going to introduce myself to him. But he stops himself. I didn't call to him, for he gave the sudden intimation that he was content to be alone. And Gatsby stretched out his arm toward the dark water in a curious way. And as far as I was from him, I could have sworn he was trembling. He's reaching toward something. So Nick looks up and distinguished nothing except a green light, minute and far away, that might have been at the end of a dock. When I looked once more for Gatsby, he had vanished, and I was alone again in the unquiet darkness. That's a symbol, folks. There has been so much ink spilt about the green light at the end of the dock. So much, but we've got to talk about it, even though this symbol's like the green light. The green light, Gatsby's reaching towards it. It's a dream. It represents what he wants in life, something that is just outside of his grasp that he is going to work in order to get. So typically this has been interpreted as the American dream, and we all know that the American dream is that through hard work and education that we can achieve financial success for ourselves and for our family, and we can live a good life. So Gatsby is reaching towards this dream. Okay, that's the end of chapter 1. Chapter 2, I am so excited for you guys to read chapter 2. Here's what you got to look for in chapter 2. The first 3 paragraphs of chapter 3, we get some intense symbolism that so many people have written about in The Great Gatsby. We've got the green light at the end of chapter 1, the beginning of chapter 2. We've got the Valley of Ashes and the Eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg. There's a link in the assignment about the eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg and what they can represent. It's really interesting symbolism there. So we go to the Valley of Ashes, and then we're going to meet Tom Buchanan's mistress. Remember that woman on the phone in chapter 1? Well, you get to meet her, and so does Nick. They go, so Tom, Nick, and Myrtle is her name. Myrtle the turtle. They're going to go into New York City, and they're going to go to an apartment that Tom has. Why does he have an apartment when he has that huge estate over in East Egg? Oh, probably because this isn't his first rodeo at the fairs, and it's not his last, and he's really got this apartment just for fairs. Anyway, they go to their apartment, and they have a crazy party. So, chapter 2, pay close attention to Myrtle, to Tom, and to that relationship. If you have any questions, concerns, feel free to reach out to me. As always, this is Mr. Bockelt. Keep reading, keep learning.